From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And ahead today, the latest edition of FSA Coffee Talk, where Todd Barrows of the Farm Service Agency will relay some of the finer details of the USDA's Coronavirus Food Assistance Program Phase 2, especially regarding program eligibility and payment limitation rules. Following up then, K-State's Robin Reid with a preview of a special webinar that K-State will host this Thursday in collaboration with the FSA. That'll provide participants even more in-depth information on CFAP 2. And later on this week's Wildlife Management segment, K-State's Charlie Lee tells us about a promising new idea in reducing deer vehicle collisions. All this and more next on Agriculture Today.
A social distancing tip.
While the CDC urges you to avoid close contact, like hugging or shaking hands, there are other non-physical ways to say hello. Wave, wink, use sign language, salute, smile, give the peace sign, throw up an air high five, do jazz hands. Remember, stay a minimum of 6 feet or 2 arms length away from others, and stay home if you can. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #alone together. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today. Thanks for being along with us once more. Well, we'll start this time around with our regular installment out of the Farm Service Agency, state headquarters for Kansas. It's what we call FSA Coffee Talk, every other Tuesday right here. And along with us now is a program specialist with the Kansas FSA, Todd Barrows, to cover some primary things going on at the FSA level of interest to you producers, and that would encompass quite a bit. Todd, good to have you back with us again.
It's good to be here, Eric. We always enjoy our time spent with the producers and with you on Coffee Talk. You know, October 1st started out as a new fiscal year for us in the government world. A big event this week has to do with processing of 2019 ARC County and PLC or price loss coverage payments. Payment processing started running today at the national level, and it will continue through tomorrow. And so producers, by the end of the week, should start seeing those payments show up in their bank accounts. So it's busy times, but times where producers look forward to, and we're processing those annual payments.
And producers always enjoy hearing about those payments being made from the farm program and as they're out in the field, fall harvest, planting wheat, and so forth. But one thing you do want to fill us in on is that Coronavirus Food Assistance Program Part 2. That is now rolling.
Yeah, it absolutely is, Eric. We are a go on that program. It's fast and furious, as we do have a short timeline on applications for that. And the thing that I wanted to focus on about today, mainly on that, is the differences between eligibility for the CFAP 2 program versus CFAP 1. You know, producers think that it's basically the same eligibility as it was for CFAP 1, but there are many subtle differences between the two programs. And so today I want to focus on those 4 main differences with the CFAP 2 program. And I'll particularly start off with eligibility differences. Mm-hmm. The first one being is an eligible producer or entity must be in the act of farming at the time of application. While that may seem redundant on the surface level, several scenarios do come up when you're thinking about that. And the first one, or most popular one that we get questions about, is what if a producer becomes deceased? If that deceased producer's estate is still conducting the farming business, then they are considered still in the act of farming. However, if that farm passes to an heir, such as a surviving spouse, or there is no estate, or if it passes through a trust or some other manner in which that's not being probated, they would not be eligible for program benefits under CFAP 2. This rule would also apply, if you think about it, to entities that have closed, sold out, or even individual producers who may have retired before they file an application. Then they are no longer in the act of farming and would not be eligible. So
an interesting particular there that you need to be aware of as far as eligibility. There are some payment limitation rules that apply to certain farm organizational structures that you want to stress too, Todd.
Yeah, that leads us into the second difference that I wanted to talk about. They have opened up the special limitation rules that apply to corporations, limited liability companies, and limited partnerships under the CFAP 1 program to now also include estates and trusts, meaning these entities can receive up to $750,000 payment limitation based on at least 3 members, heirs, or beneficiaries providing 400-plus hours of active personal labor or active personal management. This rule change also applies retroactively back to CFAP 1. So if you had an estate or a trust that applied for benefits after the CFAP 1 program and you were limited to that $250,000 limitation, but you have members or you have beneficiaries or heirs that could meet those eligibility requirements of providing the active personal labor management, you can revise your CFAP 1 application at this point in time by contacting your local county FSA office, and they'll walk you through the steps.
Now, you say there are a couple of more differences that you need to bring to producers' attention here?
Yeah, a third difference with eligibility deals with how they're doing the payment calculation and attribution process for payments. Under the CFAP 2 payments, they will no longer take into consideration member or ownership share in that calculation string. So a member with a minor share ownership and is contributing 400-plus hours of active personal labor or management can still earn up to the $250,000 payment limitation regardless of their ownership share in that direct payment entity. And that was a limiting factor under CFAP 1. This is one of those things that is going to be retroactive back to CFAP 1 that they have removed out of the payment string to help those producers. And finally, I want to mention this is more involved with our livestock industry, but contract growers are not eligible for CFAP 2 benefits, even if they do have risk in the production of that commodity or livestock where they were eligible under CFAP 1.
So there are 4 key differences between CFAP 1 and 2, but there have been other changes, especially with respect, Todd, to commodity eligibility.
Yeah, I do want to mention there are some changes on commodity eligibility as well. The biggest one that I wanted to bring to everybody's attention does affect the livestock producers, and that is dealing with breeding stock. Breeding stock was eligible under CFAP 1, but is not eligible under CFAP 2. And I want to be very clear on that. Any type of breeding stock is not eligible under CFAP 2. Once a female has had offspring or a male has been used for servicing a female, then they are no longer eligible for CFAP 2 benefits. So a cow is not eligible for CFAP 2. However, that unweaned calf at her side would be eligible for CFAP 2 benefit. Additionally, while beef cattle, hogs and pigs, and sheep are all eligible as a price trigger commodity, an expanded list of other livestock, if commercially raised for food, fiber, fur, or feathers, is also eligible under the sales commodities provisions of CFAP 2. So that's really, that sales commodities section is really an expanded versus CFAP 1. This would include aquaculture species, bison or buffalo, beefalo, deer, goats, turkeys. Those are some of the more common ones, but there's a much more extensive list or an all-inclusive list if you access the CFAP 2 fact sheet going back to that farmers.gov website where you can find that information.
It's an important footnote as well, Todd, that as opposed to CFAP 1, wheat is now included in the eligibility for CFAP 2, correct?
That is correct, Eric. Wheat is part of the CFAP 2 program. It does fall in under the price trigger commodities, and it will be treated the same as your other program commodities under that price trigger umbrella. Barley is now eligible for both CFAP 1 and CFAP 2 benefits. Initially under CFAP 1, only malting barley was eligible for benefit. They are now have open barley up for all types are eligible under the CFAP 1 and CFAP 2 provisions. And again, if they need to revise their CFAP 1 application because they grew barley, then they can contact their local county office and they can help them walk through those steps of revising that previous application.
So there are the specifics on CFAP 2 with sign-up being taken for quite a while yet, Todd.
Again, CFAP 2 sign-up period will end December the 11th. It's a relatively short and quick application period when you think about almost every producer is eligible for some facet of that CFAP 2 program. So it is a busy time.
Good reminders there. And before we let you go, there is an opportunity to once more learn more about CFAP 2. You will be a participant in a forthcoming webinar on that.
Yeah, I certainly will be. And we are thankful for our friendship with Robin Reid, K-State Extension, and we will be working with them on doing a webinar. Kansas FSA is hosting with K-State Extension on Thursday, October 8th at 2 o'clock p.m., covering the CFAP program and provisions involved in that.
And as a matter of fact, Robin is standing by, and she will have the rundown on that webinar very shortly after the break. But Todd, all good reminders for our producers about farm programs, and if anybody has those direct questions that they need answered, why your local FSA folk will handle those for them.
Absolutely, Eric. Our offices are, like I said, they're busy, but they're always willing to take time to take a phone call or answer an email message that our local producers might have. So just reach out to those local FSA offices and with your questions, and we'll try to get an answer for them.
Always good to have you visit with us here, Todd. Sit down and share information, and thanks for coming over.
Thank you, Eric. We always appreciate our time here with your listeners and providing updates on our farm programs.
Over from the Farm Service Agency State Office for Kansas, Farm Program Specialist Todd Barrows, joining us on the latest FSA Coffee Talk here on Agriculture Today. And we'll be back with more on the K-State Radio Network.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128-plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local Extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Agriculture Today is back now on the K-State Radio Network. And as promised, we've more details for you now about that special webinar that the K-State Department of Agricultural Economics will be hosting later on this week to cover in detail the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program Part 2. And joining us is one of those who will be involved in that program, agricultural economist, K-State Research and Extension, Robin Reid. Well, Robin, this is obviously a timely topic to be covered in such a webinar. So briefly here, what do you hope to accomplish with this get-together?
Well, Eric, obviously this is another round of payments that we've seen to help deal with the pandemic that's going on and the different disruptions to the supply chain and marketing costs and that kind of thing. So the second round is actually quite a bit simpler, I would say, than the first round of payments. They're looking at, in most of our commodities, the price decline between January and July. And if those commodities met a 5% price decline, then there's a formula calculation for what the payment rates will be. All of our row crop commodities are based on the 2020 planted acres of the commodity. I know that was a big issue in this first round of payments that paid based on what you had in storage. When it really came down to, there was supposed to be $16 billion in this first round of payments that went out to producers. And end of the day, when that enrollment closed, it was only about $10 billion that went out to producers. And a lot of that was because of the unpriced inventory language in there. And USDA's estimation of that was quite a bit higher than it turned out to be. So a lot of our producers didn't get a larger round of payments, specifically in row crops with the first payments. that will benefit from this second round quite a bit more.
And it's worth reiterating, as the Farm Service Agency's Todd Barrows mentioned earlier in the broadcast, there have been changes to the eligibility of certain commodities, including what's key here in Kansas, wheat.
Yes, so wheat wasn't actually in the first round of payments because as we were having bread shortages and things, we saw some increases in the wheat price throughout that period that they were looking at the price decline. Well, now when they compare January to July, wheat in all classes is meeting that 5% price decline. So that is a commodity now that will be calculated through a formula. And all of our Kansas commodities have a $15 per acre minimum. And then if the formula is more than that, there's a higher per acre rate that those commodities can get.
And it's worth noting as well, the crops that were eligible the last time will be eligible this go-round, as will livestock production. We don't want to overlook that, Robin.
Yeah, so a lot of the questions I'm getting with the row crops this time around, it's based on your 2020 APH, your crop insurance approved production history. Your 2020 actual yield will not matter. It's based on that producer level APH and your 2020 planted acres. And then as far as livestock, you're right, there's some really good payment rates here as well. Beef cattle, $55 a head, hogs and pigs, $23 a head, sheep and lambs, $27 a head. The one difference between this and the first round is it doesn't include breeding livestock. So last time we got to include the cow and the calf by her side. This time around, it's just going to be those market animals and not the breeding stock.
Well, then, to this webinar, it's coming up the afternoon of October the 8th, this coming Thursday. Around 2 o'clock is when you'll get going. And what are you planning for the webinar for the benefit of producers?
So we're going to go over some of the stuff I touched on briefly here, just how are those payments being calculated, what can you expect. But what I want to dive into as well is how did they set these payment rates? So USDA released a 30-page cost-benefit analysis of how they came up with payment rates. And if you look at the crops, the marketing percentages is also included on that, or how much of the 2020 crop is being marketed between harvest and the end of the year, and that factors into the calculation as well. So just what I want to do is explain how all this works and why there's these different components of the price calculation. And then one thing to touch on too, this CFAP 2 includes a whole bunch more specialty crop, livestock, and other commodities that the first round didn't. So I know we've talked about the traditional crops here in Kansas, but fruit, vegetables, horticulture, honey, floriculture, nursery, cactus and Christmas trees are included this time around, goat milk and wool, and there's just a whole bunch of different commodities, non-traditional commodities that are included in this round of payment as well.
And you won't be going it alone with the webinar. You're bringing on a team from the Farm Service Agency, including Todd Barrows and others, to walk through the finer points of this program.
Yeah, so we really emphasize the team approach between our Kansas Farm Service Agency and the K-State Department of Agricultural Economics. So I'll be presenting, like I said, a lot of the background of how these rates were set and that kind of thing, but we're going to have David Shem, the State Executive Director, on this webinar as well. Todd Barrows, as you mentioned, is the Ag Program Specialist, and then Carla Wyckoff as well as another Agricultural Program Specialist, specifically in the dairy programs.
And this will be interactive. There'll be opportunity for participant questions of all kinds.
Absolutely, and I think the webinar we did the first time around, that was probably close to half of the time is just us answering questions after we presented the material, and even after the webinar following up on some of those questions that we didn't have answers to. I think, like I said, this time it'll be a little simpler. The first one had a lot of questions as far as what was going to get paid on that unpriced inventory, and this is just a lot simpler formula this time around for producers to deal with.
Well, then, how to take part. And to note, you are requiring registration.
Yes, we would like everybody to register that wants to be on the webinar live. You can go to agmanager.info under the events page and find this Coronavirus Food Assistance #2 webinar. Otherwise, we are going to record it and post it on Ag Manager, and you don't have to register to get that recording. We know a lot of producers right now are out in the fields, and you do have till December 11th to sign up for this program. It was just passed that the Commodity Credit Corporation was just replenished, so there shouldn't be any issues with these funds running out. So I would encourage producers to go ahead and get through harvest and then look into this program, get enrolled in this program, and the payments will be going out when you enroll.
But again, to be part of this webinar, do register. They are limiting the participation to 500 folk, so don't be left out. This will take place again this coming Thursday, the 8th of October at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. A webinar covering the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, Part 2. agmanager.info is how to link into that program. And before we let you go, Robin, also regarding farm program benefits, those prices for the marketing year for ARC and PLC have now been finalized, and those are posted on Ag Manager as well, you say.
Yes, so this is another round of payments that will be going out anytime here. Typically, they're made in early October. But this is the regular farm programs through the 2018 Farm Bill that we're talking about, so ARC and PLC. And this is the payment that will be made on the crop you harvested last year. So it takes us an entire year to get through that marketing year to determine the marketing year average. So wheat, we did know that one earlier. It was $4.58, and that includes all classes of wheat. I know that sounds a little high for here in Kansas, but that is a PLC payment rate of 92 cents per bushel. Corn ended the marketing year at $3.56, so that's a 14-cent per bushel PLC payment rate. Grain sorghum, $3.34 per bushel, so that is a PLC payment rate of 61 cents. Soybeans, $8.58, so the PLC payment rate on that is zero. It has to get below $8.40 to get a PLC payment. That means if anyone is enrolled for wheat and corn and grain sorghum, they will be getting those PLC payments quite quickly here. And again, that payment rate is multiplied by your established yield with the Farm Service Agency and then 85% of the base acres that you have in that crop. The ARC payments, or agricultural risk coverage payments, again, those are made at the county level, so the county level yield for 2019 and this marketing year average price will be used to calculate the actual revenue. So we are awaiting those 2019 official county yields to be released, but we do have estimates of those payments up on agmanager.info.
So once again, 2019 PLC payments are locked in, and those are posted on agmanager.info, as well as the estimates for the ARC payment, with those more precise numbers due to come out quite soon on the yields at agmanager.info. Check all of that information out, as well as taking part in that CFAP 2 webinar coming up this Thursday. As always, Robin, a pleasure. Thanks for filling us in on all of this.
Thank you, Eric, and I look forward to having hopefully a lot of people on Thursday, and we'll dive into the details of this CFAP 2 program.
Very well. That's agricultural economist Robin Reid, K-State Research and Extension, with us on this part of Agriculture Today. And we'll return with more after the break. This is the K-State Radio Network.
With the shortage of primary care physicians, especially in rural areas, health education and disease prevention are vital. K-State Research and Extension programs address quality of life, personal development, and health behaviors across all life stages of all social-economic groups. To learn more about health education, one of K-State Research and Extension's 5 grand challenges, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today from the campus of Kansas State University. Eric Atkinson here. Well, as for this week's Kansas Crop Condition and Harvest Progress Report from the USDA, it's dry out there for the week ending this past Sunday. Our topsoil moisture supplies 0% surplus, 38% adequate, and now 62% short to very short. Subsoil moisture, 0% surplus, 47% adequate, and 54% short to very short now. Winter wheat planting in the state is at 56% complete now. That's well ahead of the 41% for the 5-year average. And winter wheat emergence is now at 29%. That's ahead of the 19% average for the date. The condition of the corn crop in Kansas, 54% good to excellent, 28% fair, and 18% poor to very poor, with harvest now 44% complete. And soybeans, 53% good to excellent, 33% fair, 14% poor to very poor this week. The bean harvest is now 20% done. Grain sorghum, 60% good to excellent, 28% fair, and 12% poor to very poor, with the sorghum harvest now 14% complete. And range and pasture conditions in the state, 38% good to excellent, 36% fair, and 26% poor to very poor, according to this week's wrap-up from the USDA. As for corn and bean harvest progress nationally now, we turn to the USDA's Stephanie Ho.
USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey says the weather was good for many crop activities.
As we moved from late September into early October, we saw several days of open weather in most areas of the country, particularly the plains, the Midwest, and the Northwest, and that favored crop maturation and harvest activities in most areas.
87% of the nation's corn is mature, and 25% of it has been harvested.
As we come toward the end of the season, we see this year's crop rated a bit higher than last year, when we were sitting at 56% good to excellent and 15% very poor to poor.
He says the picture is similar for soybeans.
Soybean condition, as expected at this point in the season, not much overall change. We're steady at 64% good to excellent and 10% very poor to poor. And that compares favorably to last year at this time when we were sitting at 53% good to excellent and 15% very poor to poor. We do see the overall harvest now reaching 38% by October 4th. That's well ahead of the 5-year average of 28%. In the last 2 weeks, we've seen nearly 1/3 of the U.S. soybean crop harvested, the 2-week advance going from 6 percentage points to the current number of 38%. Compare that with corn, where we've seen 17% of the corn harvested in the last 2 weeks. That's illustrative of how producers generally are going after soybeans versus corn when they are ready.
This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Now we'll hand it on over to K-State dairy specialist Mike Brook for this week's edition of Milk Lines. Mike?
Today I want to talk with our Kansas dairy producers concerning what we might be facing in cash flows for the next several months. As we look at milk prices and as we look at feed prices as we head into the next 6 months, you may see some concerns for margins. What are you going to do on your farm to help increase that margin on your dairy? Well, there's lots of different things you can look at, but one of the things I want you to look at is how many cows do you have in late lactation that are still being milked in your herd? Here's what I mean. When you look at your average calving interval or your lactation length, are you under 13 months or are you over 13 months? You know, as we start operating with those farms that are more than 13 months for a calving interval, one of the things that we need to realize is that we have a large number of animals that are working in late lactation. Well, when cows work in late lactations, one of the issues we have is that they still consume fairly large quantities of feed, but their milk production is declining quicker than their feed consumption. It's taking more pounds of feed for every pound of milk that we get. So what can you do about that? Well, I think you have to recognize why are you in that situation on your dairy. You're in that situation because animals didn't conceive at the right time. So it really is controlled by reproduction. Go back and take a look at a couple of things as it pertains to reproduction. Number one, when do you first get semen into cows? In other words, what is your average days to first service? Is that 70? Is it 80? Is it 90? What is it in your herd? As you push that average days to first service out further and further, in general, the length of time that cows are in lactation is also going to increase because we lose opportunities to get cows pregnant. Then the other thing I would encourage you to take a look at is, so let's say you're getting semen into cows by 70 days in milk. That's your average days to first service. But you have a lot of those animals that don't conceive that first time, right? So maybe you do a pretty good job and you get 35% of the animals that you service on that first service pregnant. What about the other 65%? When will we detect that they are open, and when will we be able to put semen into them again? So we get another opportunity to get them pregnant. On many of our farms, we might be anywhere from 2 to 3 heat cycles away before we actually get semen in the cow for the second time. Well, that's, again, going to lengthen the lactation length in our herd simply because are you going to get 100% of those second service animals pregnant? Probably not. And in fact, it'll probably still be somewhere around that 35% range. So we still have a significant number of animals that are going to continue to carry in to that third service. So when will you detect that you have open cows after the second service, and when will you be putting semen into those animals for the third time? I think you get the picture. So one of the things you need to visit with your veterinarian or maybe even your AI company is how can you shorten that interval between services? In other words, how can you detect the open cows quicker? How can you get them on some sort of hormone program or other programs so that we get semen in quicker if they are actually open? In this way, we can reduce the length of lactation, get cows pregnant sooner in lactation, which will help us operate with more animals that are in the peak lactation to high production areas and spending less time at the end of lactation on our dairy herds. This is Mike Brook with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairymen to evaluate how animals in late lactation may be dragging on their cash flow.
Many thanks, Mike, as always. And we'll be back with our final segment after you hear this. This is Agriculture Today.
Social distancing slows the spread of coronavirus, so if you have a fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going in. More info at coronavirus.gov. Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
For you now on Agriculture Today, our weekly segment on wildlife management. Joining us once more, as always, Charlie Lee, wildlife specialist, K-State Research and Extension. Charlie, you'll tell us today about a new approach to reducing deer vehicle collisions, and this was the subject of recent research, which we'll talk about, but this is, of course, an ongoing problem here in Kansas and elsewhere, particularly in the rural areas.
Well, animal and vehicle collisions occur too frequently. They can cost large amounts and a very substantial safety risk to people, and it can impact animal populations. We're still struggling to find techniques that reduce or eliminate these animal-vehicle collisions. We've tried many things to reduce deer vehicle collisions because those are the ones that are most likely to occur and to cause damage. Vehicles are a high-speed predator that deer have not recognized as such, and consequently often stand in the middle of the road when hit with bright lights or suddenly bolt across the road into the nearest cover, and then we have that collision.
And those previously tried methods just haven't worked out. The deer whistles come to mind immediately.
Well, the deer whistles of a technique that's been tested many times, it's certainly not effective. There's other types of mitigation measures that have been used, and roadside reflectors and mirrors and repellents and hazing and vegetation management, lots of things that have been tried. But the only thing that seems to have been effective over larger areas is roadside fencing. And when you put adequate fencing up in the right locations with animal overpasses or underpasses, we seem to see a substantial reduction in these vehicle-animal collisions. However, it's just not fiscally possible to put a fencing in every location.
Tell us then about this new idea, and it's outfitting a vehicle so that it's more evident to the deer, you say.
This is a project that was done by the National Wildlife Research Center at Sandusky, Ohio, where they had the idea, based on some early research, that they needed to make the vehicles more apparent. Since most of the collisions occur at night or dawn or dusk, the idea was to light the vehicle up by having LED lights shine back towards the vehicle when these lights were mounted on something like a grill guard, if you will, but aimed down so that they did not impair the vision of the driver. The study was fairly simple in design. It was done at the NASA Plum Brook Station in Ohio, which is about a 5,000-acre tract, basically of old fields, some woodlands, undeveloped, with a small amount of development in suburban area included. So it could be very typical of activity here in the Midwest. They used a Ford pickup with a forward-looking infrared camera so that they could detect the deer at a distance much greater than what you would be able to detect in the headlights. They had a video monitor of that inside the cab on the passenger side so that they could see real-time video. The truck was equipped with normal LED headlights as well as that LED light bar that shined back on the vehicle. So then they knew when the deer were coming up. They kept track of when they spotted the deer in the headlights and measured the distance between the time that the deer made movement, if they did, or if they had to take evasive measures and slow down, and then they measured that distance. So they were looking at the distance from the vehicle to the deer before the deer avoided the vehicle, if you will.
So how then did deer react to this illuminated truck?
Well, it was surprising in that the deer-vehicle interaction decreased, and they called that dangerous interaction, was when the vehicle and the deer got within 50 meters of each other. And that decreased with the use of that light shining back towards the vehicle. So the deer were able perhaps to see the vehicle better than being blinded by the lights. They recognized it as something that it was dangerous, and they did not always cross the road in front of that particular vehicle. If they did cross the road, they were going in the direction of cover. Oftentimes they stayed place or turned away, but did not seem to cross the road directly in front of the vehicle. And that was only 10% of the time, where without that LED light facing the vehicle, there were 35% of the times that it was in a dangerous situation. Their research very clearly showed that vehicle approaches without that frontal illumination were 3.6 times more likely to result in a dangerous interaction with deer than vehicle approaches using this light bar. So a substantial reduction in possibilities of deer-vehicle collisions. Their conclusion was that vehicle illumination via that rear-facing light has the potential to greatly reduce deer-vehicle collisions as well as other species. And they suggested that future work would be necessary to kind of fine-tune the approach to focus on whatever target species is most at risk.
Again, to stress, there is no commercialized product of this type yet, but the concept itself does seem to show good promise, Charlie.
I think it's a product that will probably soon be on the market, but as far as I know, there's nothing like that currently available.
Looking forward to seeing where this goes, though. That is, the illuminated grille of a vehicle may actually be very effective in causing deer to avoid the path of that vehicle and therefore reduce deer-vehicle collisions. We'll find out more about it in the future, undoubtedly. Charlie, thanks for going over this with us today. He's a wildlife specialist, K-State Research and Extension, Charlie Lee. As we finish up today, if you'd like to hear a replay of this or any of our broadcasts, they are archived daily at agtoday.net, and the instructions for automatically downloading the broadcast are right there as well, agtoday.net. In the meantime, thanks for tuning in right here. Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.